Hello and what is up YouTube? My name is G3Iron and welcome to today's discussion where we're going to be talking about revamping and re-hyping 8 of Path of Exile's historic leagues and expansion. If you enjoyed today's discussion and you're new to the community, you can of course like, subscribe, and ding the bell to be notified about future video discussions just like this one. And if you're new to Path of Exile in general, chances are you probably haven't heard of some of these particular leagues that we're going to be bringing up, or maybe you've been around for a long time and this is going to be a bit of a nostalgia trip and put you in the Wayback Machine. Either way, whether you're new or old to Path of Exile, welcome to today's discussion and let's dive into our ideas for these 8 leagues. The first league revamp that we're going to take a look at is the Anarchy League. This came out officially as patch 0.11.0. Anarchy League famously introduced Rogue Exiles, and Rogue Exiles are really at this point just another monster running around Ray class for us to explode in no time flat, right? They don't really necessarily enhance the game as they're currently constructed. Nonetheless, there's some really fun and cool mechanics for potential that are there with Rogue Exiles. It's really cool to think that there are other characters, kind of like our characters, who are running around Ray class, jamming all kinds of Vaal skills into their abilities, and then casting them on anybody else who might dare get in their way. So we've got 2 suggestions here. Either upon killing a Rogue Exile, you will spawn a Uber Lab trial if you're in maps, or if you're not yet in maps, killing a Rogue Exile will spawn a Vaal side area. There's at least one problem with this suggestion, of course, and that's that oftentimes Grinding Gear Games likes to preload various side encounters in a map or in a zone when you load in through your loading screen. That allows you to have a more smooth gameplay experience while you're in the zone, and it cuts down on the number of load screens that you have to process through. So if that's the case, rather than saying that killing a Rogue Exile will spawn an Uber Lab trial in maps or will spawn a Vaal side area, you could simply say that wherever there is a Vaal side area or wherever there is an Uber Lab trial, there is a Rogue Exile who also spawns alongside it, who is essentially protecting this area. This would hopefully increase the amount of Uber Lab trials that are prevalent and available, which is always a complaint for players playing solo self-found, and would allow players to target farm side areas like Vaal areas for Vaal gems in a more convenient fashion. Moving on to Domination League. Domination League released at 1.00. We're all familiar with various shrines, most notably the speed shrine, especially when you're leveling, right? That's the shrine that we're pretty much all looking for, no matter what character archetype, ascendancy, or class we're playing. Who doesn't like going faster? I like going faster. We all like going faster. Even people who hate the zoom meta still like going faster and still click on movement speed shrines. Or adrenaline shrines if you're looking for their actual name. While it's incredibly cool to have this momentary boost of power, whether that's elemental resistances or maybe crit chance or maybe knockback or maybe move speed, it would be so much cooler and so much more relevant to today's Path of Exile if we tweaked shrines a little bit. The proposed suggestion that we've come up with is when you kill or potentially click on a shrine, you steal the mods from the rare pack that is guarding that particular shrine. This, in effect, would act like a mini headhunter effect, and you would now be running around throughout the rest of the zone with, let's say, a 20-second duration with the mods of the monsters that were inhabiting and protecting that shrine. Don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying get rid of the shrine. You still keep the shrine, but now you also get this little mini buff of a headhunter effect. I think this would be really cool. Oftentimes players know about headhunters, players have seen other players using headhunters, and headhunters are a chase item for a reason. This would essentially give a whole lot of players who don't otherwise have the ability to get a headhunter or are on their way to getting a headhunter but haven't gotten one yet, it gives them a small taste of what that zoom fun playstyle can be. And if you're really worried about balancing, well, you can always add a couple more negative potential effects onto monsters that might specifically be guarding these dark shrines. Let's move on to our third league that we've got ideas for, which was the Ambush League 1.1. Now, while there are some very specific currency farming strategies that do revolve around utilizing boxes and traps and essentially re-rolling boxes, we've got a twist to go alongside with that already strong meta and strong approach that was introduced with strong boxes through the Ambush League. The tweak is this. Right now, you can craft upon strong boxes. If you're new to Path of Exile, you might not have even known that, so PSA, you can craft on strongboxes, and that's very, very helpful oftentimes. But one thing that you can't do with a strongbox right now is you can't change the base type of the strongbox. If you get a strongbox that, let's say, is going to drop divination cards when you really need gems, or if you really get gems when you need other sorts of crafting currency, well, you're just stuck. That's going to be the strongbox that you have. So for revamping and rehyping Ambush League, we would want to introduce something like an ambush orb that would allow you to re-roll the base of the strongbox as it appears in your zone. So the example would be, let's say a blacksmith strongbox appears in your particular zone and you don't want that. Instead, you want to farm some divination cards. So you could use the ambush orb on that strong box, and it doesn't just re-roll all of the stats that you've already crafted on the box, but ideally you do this before you craft anything on the box using your regular currency like chaos orbs or like alchemy orbs or like chance orbs. Before you do any of that, you use the ambush orb to re-roll the box into what you're aiming for, hopefully getting that divination card box that you've really been needing and looking for. This could potentially help, of course, with challenge completion, but also, again, would allow for SSF players to have even further customization on the types of rewards that they are encountering inside the zone that they are currently playing. One of the first big expansions in Path of Exile was Sacrifice of the Vaal. It introduced Edziri and a whole bunch of other things that we nowadays take for granted in Path of Exile as a part of the core gameplay experience. As my good friend Beckett and I were bouncing ideas off of one another and chatting about this exact topic the other day, Beckett came up with some great ideas, so shout out to him. He's, of course, the player who taught me about Path of Exile and rescued me from Path of Exile from other unnamed action RPGs many years ago. So here are a couple of Beckett's ideas for revamping and rehyping the Sacrifice of the Vaal expansion. First off, oftentimes when you kill Edziri, she's no longer relevant, right? Edziri fragments are pretty much relevant early on in a league, and then once you've gotten a couple of uniques from it, if you're an SSF, or once players have started farming her pretty consistently and then trading her items away if you're in a trade league, she's simply no longer that relevant as a boss to fight. So Beckett's solution to this is that upon killing regular Edziri, she will give you an altar, which will unlock for a double corruption, similar to the Temple of Atzoatl. If you like that, wait, there's more. Upon killing Uber Edziri, which I'm sure a whole bunch of you out there are scratching your head and you didn't even realize that there is an Uber form of Edziri, but trust me, there is. Upon killing an Uber form of Edziri, she would unlock a corrupting altar that would give you a triple corruption effect. I mean, why not, right? Synthesis items can have up to 3 implicits, so why not allow for a triple corruption on corrupted items from Uber Edziri? And there's some other triple memes in there that we could drop, but I'm going to save those for you guys to make in the comments. How cool would this be to take an item and potentially maybe it's a really high risk, high reward option. Maybe the corrupting altar from Uber Edziri has got like a 75% chance to just poof your item away and a 25% chance to give you triple corruptions. Or maybe it's simply a chance at triple corruptions and it gives you a single corrupt, a double corrupt, or a triple corrupt, or a poof. There's lots of different options that you could have with this style of revamp that would make farming Edziri, though both the regular version and the Uber version, very, very appealing indeed. Next up on our rework and rehype cycle is the Torment League, which came out in 1.3. This introduced, of course, the tormented ghosts and tormented spirits that fly around throughout Ray class. They're essentially the treasure goblin or the treasure pig or the treasure bag that has legs and runs away from you. Again, most of you don't realize that you can chase these things into various different monsters and they'll grant various bonuses or potential various dangerous affixes to monsters that they come into contact with. While that's cool in and of itself, it's hardly modern POE. We're playing in the midst of Heist League where there's multiple different bosses in multiple different zones with an entirely alternate way of potentially playing the game through heists and through grand heists. Tormented spirits could certainly use a revamp other than simply being green floaty guys that run around and occasionally interact with other monsters. So we've got a couple of ideas here. First off, what if you changed the drop table that possessed spirits had and simply made it so that possessed spirits could drop legacy gear? The caveat here is that you'd have to kill the possessed spirit before it came into contact with or touched any monster. If it happened to make contact with any monster, it would then essentially lose that aspect of the drop table. This would incentivize players to have a sort of sense of urgency and a sense of imminent potential massive rewards if they're able to hunt down and chase down that tormented spirit that was unfortunate enough to cross their path. This essentially turns possessed spirits into reliquary keys from various leagues where old legacy items have become available for a limited time in a limited league setting. Some of you don't even know that this item exists, but it does. It still exists in Standard. This is what Comb's Heart used to be. Comb's Heart used to give you 1,000 flat life. You still would have no sockets, but since the item has changed into its current edition where now you've got increased fire damage, it's got no sockets, and only 500 life. This would be a really, really cool item. It's incredibly expensive. It's incredibly rare as well in Standard League, and it would be really, really cool if instead of seeing a possessed spirit and going, oh, that's obnoxious, kill it, going, oh my goodness, that's potentially a chase unique item right there. What if it drops, I don't know, a Legacy Comb's Heart? Or what if it drops, I don't know, any sort of regularly restricted item that otherwise wouldn't be able to drop in the league you're in? Maybe a Headhunter, for example. This relatively small change to just the drop items available on possessed spirits revamps the entirety of the league, makes it relevant, and makes it something that you really want to interact with as soon as you see a green floaty spirit in your zone. On top of this, you could also make it so that way ghosts now interact with other league mechanics. We saw this was incredibly successful with Delirium, and we're seeing that this is a direction that Grinding Gear Games wants to go in the future. They are essentially designing leagues with other leagues in mind. So what if we revamped ghosts to allow them to possess various encounters? For instance, if they possessed a metamorph, what if they guaranteed an additional body part to drop? So you'd have the one body part that potentially could drop if you fill up the juice bar on the metamorph, but regardless if you're able to fill up the juice bar on the metamorph, you're always guaranteed to have at least one body part drop when you've got that tormented ghost with a chance for a potential additional body part. That sounds pretty great. What if the spirit possesses a Nico encounter? Well, simply put, more Soulfight. Everybody likes more Soulfight. At least all the people who like Delve like more Soulfight. So why not allow this to give you some more Soulfight? What about a possessed strongbox? Maybe all of the boxes in that particular zone now have ghost increased item rarity and item quantity. This would be great, especially if you're looking to farm up particular divination strategies and particular prophecy strategies that turn all the monsters in a zone into strongboxes. You can now craft all of the monsters, and all of the monsters are now also going to have Tormented Spirit, increase item quantity, and increase item rarity on them. That's some juicy strongboxes. What if it possesses an Alva encounter? Maybe it turns all of the rare monsters that are normally inside that distortion of time where you're interacting with Vaal leaders from the past, and it turns all of those rare monsters into tormented ghosts that are now running around, and you're looking to chase them down and hunt them down for their potential legacy drops. These are just a couple ideas about how we could take an old league mechanic like Torment, revamp it, and bring it up to today's standard and make it incredibly fun to chase down and hunt. Next up on our revamp list is Prophecy League. Prophecy League came out in 2.3 and introduced, of course, silver coins and Navali, which allows us to farm prophecies. The one recommended change that I've got for Prophecy is that essentially you attach it to the Syndicate and you allow somebody in the Syndicate to actually exchange you prophecies out. Maybe you could attach it to Fortification or Transportation, since if you're running Syndicate, you know that you're pretty much never going to use those unless you're in an SSF experience and you've got a very specific region for setting up your board to actually interact with Fortification or with Transportation. For the most part, those are kind of two dead guild areas in Syndicate that you kind of try to lock out. So what if we made it so that way they actually had something useful, something that was competitive, something that was intriguing, something that allowed you to take old dead prophecies that you're not going to run or that you're not going to use and exchange them into something more beneficial. This could essentially function like Mysterious Gift, which is, of course, a prophecy in and of itself. This would be a prophecy for prophecies, so that way you could get different prophecies than the prophecies you've already gotten. Yo, dog, I heard you like prophecies. This allows for an RNG experience with a sort of layer of prophecy gambling on top of the already big gamble that it is whenever you're seeking a prophecy using silver coins. And it allows you to finally put to use some of those prophecies that you otherwise simply won't run, whether you're in Trade League or in SSF. Take a whole bunch of your useless prophecies and turn them into maybe a whole bunch more useless prophecies, or maybe turn them into something that's actually very, very valuable and needed for your particular character in the setting that you're playing Path of Exile. Next up on our rework list is the Essence League. Essence League has got a special place in this balding man's beating heart, because Essence League was one of the leagues where I really sat down and began to take Path of Exile in hardcore incredibly serious. And by incredibly serious, I mean I stopped playing pretty much every other game and focused on Path of Exile. The benefit that essence crafting offers right now is, of course, very specific targeted farming for crafts in a particular environment for a particular item set. You can use essences to either boost yourself as you're leveling, or you can farm up and upgrade those essences in order to give yourself top tier gear and potentially craft an endgame version of an item that you've always been looking for. Essence crafting in this regard is incredibly cool, and in some ways it's a bit of a peek into what modern Path of Exile has become, which is essentially reducing the amount of RNG that is available in the crafting process. So our suggestion to change or to tweak Essence League isn't necessarily a massive change, but rather is a numerical change or a buff to essence crafting to make it even more viable in the world that we live in, where there are such things as Awakener Orbs, Crusader Blades that have got explodey chests, etc. We've got to do something to make it so that way essences can be both viable for twink gear as well as viable for endgame mapping gear. So the suggestion is that crafts can roll higher amounts of whatever it is that they would classically be rolling on the essence for that eye level. So this would include the top tier, making it so that way twink gear can both push past what its eye level would normally be at, or push past whatever the top tier gear would be for an item level 86 or even item level 100 item. This would both create a new platform for players to push for twink gear, for gear that you're using while you're leveling up through the 10-act story campaign, and for mirror tier gear. That's right, this would be a whole nother level of affixes that would be available to push your build and to push your items even further. Of course, there is a big risk to try to maneuver and remove various affixes on those items once you've secured the one stat line that you want through essence crafting. There's a lot of risk to try to annul off useless mods that you don't want and keep the essence craft. High risk, high reward, but some mitigation because you're guaranteeing at least one output. That's essentially modern POE crafting, and I think we could hit that and continue that theme with this revamp to Essence League. Breach League came out in 2.5 and of course gave us all of the different domains for Zoth and Tull and Ulnatol and Chayula, everybody who we enjoy, Esh, and we enjoy running those classically if you're going to run them for leveling and for XP purposes, most of the time level 70 through the mid to high 80s. Breach can be really fun because there's a lot of monster density, but besides for monster density, there's not necessarily something calling you or drawing you to engage with Breach in and of itself. So there's a couple of suggestions. First off, rework Breach so that overlapping breaches, if multiple breaches would spawn in a zone, like let's say the Temple of Atsuatl, or maybe make it so that way multiple different hands can actually spawn in any overworld area, sort of the way how Alva master missions can essentially spawn close enough to each other. I'm sure you've seen memes where Alva is bouncing back and forth saying just in time, just in time. Imagine if you had multiple different breach hands that had spawned close enough that they could overlap. We would rework and suggest that reworking Breach League could actually overlap and guarantee that a Breach Lord would appear in those overlapping breaches. Then Breach Lords would now on kill drop an associated stone, an entire stone. No more shards, no more fragments, just an associated full-on breach stone that would drop on kill. Now, of course, if you're saying iron, that's way too easy, because now, of course, you're just going to have stones at a basically 1-to-1 rate. You could say that breaches could become more rare as an event, or you could up the monster difficulty. You could up the HP on Breach Lords and make it much more difficult to take them down. The stone that would then drop from the Breach Lords would be based on the zone level. So if you're running breaches at a top tier item level, then you'll be rewarded with a top tier type of stone. If you're running them at a relatively low level, well, then you're just going to get a basic stone. What about splinters? Well, we've got a suggestion for that as well. Splinters that drop can now be used to upgrade breach stones. You can actually collect and essentially turn in or trade in those splinters in order to upgrade a full breach stone that you've already got to its next tier. The last suggestion for Breach is that upon killing a Breach Lord in a Breach Stone encounter would give you a Syndicate style option to either execute or imprison, right? That's sort of the Syndicate mindset. We've already got the UI for this, but instead of having it interact with the Syndicate board, rather it could drop a unique that's associated with that particular boss, like a Zoff's particular unique or Chayula's particular unique, you could choose that, or you could choose to drop another stone that would again roll on an RNG table and potentially give you an upgraded stone or potentially a basic stone. This gives more player agency while also keeping layers of RNG for the drops that are there and present and available from Breach Lords. As we wrap up today's discussion, I want to give a shout out and a friendly recommendation that you check out Skiazos, both on YouTube and streaming live on Twitch. Besides being a guild member and in general just an awesome person, some of his gaming background includes, of course, Path of Exile, Diablo 1, 2, and 3, Lineage 2, and of course the Command & Conquer Red Alert series. He's got a regular streaming schedule that you can see above my slightly balding forehead. And if you're wondering what his POE accolades are and what his credentials are, he's been on top of blight farming for a long time. In terms of the meta build that is emerging right now from Heist, where so many players are swapping over to playing Golemancers, my boy Skiazos has been running that build since the OG time when you could be running Golemancers and farming blights. This is the guy that I go to when I've got a question about blights and how to run blighted maps and what's the strategy given the particular league. And I'm not being hyperbolic when I say I give him 2 thumbs up. He's where I go when I've got questions about Golemancers. If you're looking for any of his links to any of his Twitch or his YouTube, those are down below in the video description for your convenience. Thanks once again for joining us today. I'd love to hear your comments down below, what suggestions you've got for any of these prehistoric or relatively old leagues in Path of Exile. Maybe you heard a suggestion from me and thought, no, that's just insane, and here's the reasons why you can't do that. Or maybe we've piqued your interest and your curiosity, and maybe your own imagination station has come up with a couple of ideas of your own. Feel free to share those down below in the comments, and I look forward to interacting and further discussing each of your ideas with each of you. And I hope that today is the day a Mirror of Calandra drops for you.
Thanks for watching that video. If you'd like more information on any of our discussion points today, you can see them down below in the video description. If you'd also like to join our Discord or support our Patreon, you can do so with the links down below. Thanks again, and big shout out to all of our Patreon supporters.